My name's Gillian McCain. I'm the books editor of The Herald, and I love Barbara Kingsolver's work. And I'm sure most of you also do. So please wish her a very warm welcome. This is the biggest crowd we've ever had at this bookshop. So thank you so much. I must confess I haven't read all your books. I've read about half of them. And now, because your book publisher, Jonathan Ball, has been so kind to send some to the Herald, we'll be giving some as prizes to our readers. And I look forward to reading the balance.
Well, don't worry, there's still time.
Life's short, too many books, not enough time. Yeah. I've got a list of questions. I'll go through it. And then I would very much like to see if anybody in the audience would like to ask you questions, because they're your fans and they know your work probably better than I do. Yeah. I'd like to start off that when I've read your books, I've always felt you've got a very keen sense of social justice. And now you're in South Africa, and it's the first time you've been here, but how does that resonate with you? Because we've had a history of total injustice in this country. Well,
did you all hear the question? Yes. Okay. Well, I'll just answer it then. It's amazing for me to be in your country. I have waited a long time to come, 18 years to be exact. I've been, South Africa has been on my sort of moral and social justice radar for a long time. I remember when Hector Peterson was shot. I was young then, and I think that's when I read that news and understood that. I understood the nature of your war here, and it was a long war. And I remember, when I was in college, I joined organizations that helped pressure our colleges to divest. The divestiture movement that was, and the international travel boycott, and all of those things that were I was sort of watching the whole world watching South Africa, and so the reorganization, the liberation, the new government of your country is so exciting, and it's also so new, and that's an interesting thing for me to watch. And it's so exciting for me to be here and to travel around. I've seen a lot. I've been here, I think, exactly 11 days. I've been in cities and townships. I've been on the Transvaal. I've been in the Fynbos. My husband is here with me, and we just took 4 beautiful days of vacation off from the book tour to drive the garden route. So I have seen the biggest and oldest tree in Africa. I saw it today, and I stood under that tree. Who here has seen? Well, I know there are a lot of big trees, but the one that we visited today is just by the Storms River Bridge. Okay, who here has seen that tree? Okay, that's a great tree. That was today. Today I stood under that tree and I looked up at that incredible Podocarpus falcatus, who has been standing there. I mean, I think of it as a who, as it's a living being, and he or she, they are he or she. I'm not sure which that one is. I didn't check its genitals, but let's just say it's she. She was already 300 years old when the first Europeans got here. She has seen a lot. She has seen a lot of coming and going. And I just thought about that, and I just thought, she must think your country is just the blink of an eye. It's so new, it's so young, it has so much potential. So I'm excited with you and for you about where you're going.
Thank you. Now, you mentioning this is your first trip to South Africa, but you spent some early years in Congo. And in your writing, you also root your books in a sense of place, like Virginia and Appalachians and Kentucky and
Wherever.
Yeah.
Wherever.
Thinking of the bean trees, it was way further south. Yes. So now, having seen a little bit of our country, is there any chance of a book centered here, or do you feel you have to live and know a place?
Well, you're right. Setting is extremely important to me. Place is. It's so much of what I write about. I think place and community, and so I have to know a place well to write about it. Or conversely, if I'm going to write about a place, I make a point of going there to know it well. Sometimes it works both directions. But if I were, I can't quite imagine what would make me think I should write a book set in South Africa when there are so many really, really wonderful South African writers, which I'm still discovering your rich heritage of writers. I might set part of a novel in South Africa. In fact, I did. There's a part of the Poisonwood Bible that one of the daughters ends up going to South Africa, and she spends some time here. And so I actually had it's an acquaintance, someone I met, a journalist I met through our journalism connections, Kate Turkington. People seem to know that name. Okay. She helped me with details because I couldn't come here to do that research. It was just a little bit of the book. So I would call her up and ask her, to just things like, imagine you're walking down, the street of this kind of neighborhood. Tell me what you would see. And so she was my South African informant, but because it was only a very little part of the book, I could do it that way. But if it were going to be a big part of the book, I have to put my feet on the ground. I have to know what a place smells like. I have to know what trees are in bloom in the month that I'm writing about, and what the grit of the dirt, what color the dirt is. I have to know things that they just don't tell you in Wikipedia. So yes, place is very important. And you've probably already figured out that the way I answer questions, you're never going to get through all of those.
I'd love to keep you here that long.
Don't worry.
Well, it actually does lead me on to one of your books that I've recently read, which is Animal, Vegetable, Miracle. And I'm presuming this is your co-author with you here?
Yes, my husband Stephen, and our third co-author was our daughter Camille. So yeah, that was a family project, the book and the project we described.
Who here is familiar with that book, a non-fiction book? So it's a few of you. Okay, it's wonderful because it's true life. It's how this family lived for a year. I'm wondering if you could perhaps tell our audience how that was.
Sure. Animal, Vegetable, Miracle is a nonfiction book, a nonfiction narrative about 1 year and our families. The subtitle is A Year of Food Life. We decided, we live on a farm. We have always been people who pay attention to where our food comes from, who think about that. But we decided to spend a year just being really mindful about that, and to try to shorten the distance between our food's production and consumption as much as to make that distance so short that we would really know the people involved. For a lot of it, that was us, because, as I said, we live on a farm, we grow, we have a huge, out-of-control vegetable garden. I've discovered South Africans are really big into their gardens. We've seen some great gardens. The garden route, however, is mostly about trees, I'm here to tell you, which is fine, but I don't know what we expected, but we weren't disappointed. But we did see gardens. We saw, we actually poked into people's vegetable gardens and, looked to see what they were growing, because we're so curious about that. But we did, in fact, grow a lot of our food, but we also went to our farmers market. We got to know our farmers on a first name basis. We really sort of spent time discovering our local food shed. And so it's a book about that. And it's really not so much a book about us as about sort of the natural history of foods, and it's quite amazing to me to realize that if I had talked with my grandfather about, knowing where your food comes from, he would have laughed at that notion, because he lived on a farm. He was from farmers and sharecroppers, and it's quite amazing that in really just 2 generations, in the last half of the last century, something very, very ordinary on the one hand, and also extremely important, our control over the sourcing and production of our food, was taken from us. It was a bum deal. The food industries sort of swiped that from us and sort of said, I'll make you a deal. I'll make this so easy for you. Just let me handle it. And I'll give you, the Lunchable, whatever that is, and sort of all these processed things which were supposed to be so modern and which are turning out to be so dreadful for our health, for our environment, and for so many reasons. So we just felt like it was a good time to explore the possibility of reconnecting ourselves with the source of our food. The book was, I don't know, we had modest hopes for it. We hoped that, some people would read it, and in fact it was just kind of crazy successful. People were so excited about this.
It does. It makes you want to grow your own vegetables and to know where the seed comes from that you grow them from as well.
Well, what we understood when we started getting, just so much feedback and so many letters, and people sent us pictures and said, I plowed up my whole little front yard and made a vegetable garden, and my neighbors think I'm crazy, but we're so happy. And then I talked to my neighbors, and they're going to do the same thing. What we realized is that there's something primal and thrilling about just that connection between ourselves and our food. It's something that the human animal is supposed to know. It's one of the things it makes us happy to understand, to know about. So that's that.
Thanks. Which leads me on to something that you mentioned in that book, how she reads seed catalogs for fun. Now, writers are often great readers. What do you read for pleasure apart from seed catalogs?
Fiction. My go-to pleasure reading is contemporary fiction, but I also love classics. There are certain things like Middlemarch. That's probably one of my favorite novels of all time, and I try to read it every couple of years. I reread it because every time it's a little bit of a different book, and I just realized that George Eliot was just a woman who knew everything about human nature. So I love Dickens, I love Virginia Woolf, I love Steinbeck, but I also love whatever's coming out this year, and there are always more books I want to read than I have time to read, but as a rule I try to read the kinds of books that I would like to have written, and that has always been my policy. I don't read anything that sort of disappoints me. I didn't go to school to learn to be a writer. I didn't take writing classes. I was very lucky to get to go to college. When I say college, I mean university, to U. Very, very few people from my town. I grew up in a rural, poor farming community. I was almost the only person from my high school class who got to go to university. So I thought, I better study something, practical and useful that I could parlay into a living. So I studied science because, who could possibly make a living writing stories? I didn't dream I could be that lucky. So because I didn't study writing in school, I studied writing, I now realize, from a very early age by reading and reading closely and reading really good books that, as I said, I wish I could have written myself. So that's my bar.
So I've got to ask, because we've just had the movie here, no 50 Shades of Grey on your reading list?
You know what? I was trying to decide. Here's my 50 Shades of Grey story. My younger daughter and I, my younger daughter is 18, she was then maybe 16, and she and I were staying over at a friend's house, and we were in the spare bedroom, and we were, we were getting ready to go to bed, and I said, look, it was one of the I think it was the original 50 Shades of Grey that was on the floor in this friend's guest room, and Lily said, let's read. Let's look at it. Like, because we were both really curious what the fuss is about. So we did a dramatic reading to each other. Not of that. We didn't get to those parts. Just the first page. It was like. I mean, it was sort of. I shouldn't spend time criticizing another person's writing, but we did this dramatic reading. I'm one roommate and she's the other roommate. Jennifer, I think I have a cold. Oh, you should take some what do you take, the Theraflu or whatever. Well, I have this interview. I'm supposed to talk to this guy. Oh, don't worry. I'll do the interview. It was like that. It was like really, really, really bad. So,
okay, I won't make you libel anyone.
So then we said, well, there must be some stuff later on that's creating the fuss, but we didn't get that far. We just...
On that same subject, you are a parent, a mother, and a lot of the people here tonight are mothers or grandmothers or fathers and grandfathers. What books did you enjoy as a child, and what books have you and your husband brought your girls' attention to?
Well, that's a really good question. Obviously, I brought 50 Shades of Grey to my 18-year-old. Only the first 2 pages. Well, as a child, I was omnivorous. I read ferociously. I figured out how to read when I was 3, and then I remember it really well. I just thought, if I try hard enough, I can make this happen. Because I had watched adults in my life read and just was so hungry for that magical thing that was obviously happening between their minds and this book. So I just one day sat down with a newspaper and just basically said, I'm not getting up from here until I can read. And so so I didn't read the whole business section or anything, just I started making out words. And then after that, it was just anything I could get my hands on. And as I have told you, I lived in a very small town, rural area. We didn't have much of a library. And the librarian was anti-children. She felt that children should not soil her books. So when you would go in there, she'd just start scowling at you and following you around in the stacks until you would leave. So I developed a habit of being really sneaky. I would just sneak in and hide pull back in the back. It was like a room small. The whole library was smaller than this room. It wasn't easy to hide, but I was a cryptic child. So I would just and she also had a lot to say about, this is not a book for children. Anything that I would pull down, she would say, this is not a book for children. Well, what does that make me want to do? Read those books, right? So the saving grace was that we had a bookmobile. Now, do you have those here? Have you heard of them? Yes, no. It's like a bus, like an old school bus that's been refitted as a library. It has shelves and books, whatever books have been donated or wherever they dig them up. So that would come through our little town and on a regular schedule, like the second Tuesday of the month or something. It would park down by the hospital, and I would go down there, and she was only supposed to allow me to check out three was the maximum. So I would just fling myself on the floor of the bookmobile and say, please, 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 please let me take 15. Okay. So it was like that. Me and books. I just was hungry to read. Books that made a great impression on me, maybe like at the age of 6 or 7, like Louisa May Alcott, Little Women, Little Men. Those books were fantastic. I began a book that sort of an adult book that changed my life was Doris Lessing. I found the Children of Violence novels, the Martha Quest novels. Do you know those? Those were some of her first novels. I read those at just the right age. I was like 18 or 19, and they just knocked me out. And I think those were the first books that let me know that, okay, books always allowed me, what literature did for me was it sort of made the narrow walls of my little world tumble down so that I could see farther, and I could see other kinds of people and other kinds of places. And when I read Doris Lessing, I read about what she wrote about the color bar and about gender, and I realized that these same constraints that I knew in my little town were everywhere, and these are things that people are sort of aching to change and to fix and to talk about everywhere. And that's the first time I consciously thought, wow, a novel is this powerful thing. It's so much mightier than a newspaper in a certain way, or any kind of a weapon, because it connects people across every kind of barrier. So, long answer. What books did we read to our children? Well, likewise, I just made sure that they had plenty to read, and that they knew that they knew nice librarians and didn't have to hide from them. And our one daughter loved the Little House on the Prairie books, Laura Ingalls Wilder. I remember she just went through those like, I don't know, like they were supplying her with some unknown nutrient that she suddenly needed. I don't know, she just read them one after another, and we read them together. We always read aloud to we started reading aloud to our kids, and then very early on they would say, okay, now I'm going to read to you. And so we would go back and forth chapter by chapter, and I think reading aloud is so important. I think that it might be a dying art, because it's so easy, and believe me, as a working mother, I know how easy it is to just put your kid in front of a screen. But there's something that happens when you read aloud to your kid, or when they read aloud to you, that is incomparable, because you're practicing that, inhabiting those characters. When you read aloud, you're participating, and you're showing your child how to participate in this magical thing called literature. So we just did a lot of that, and it almost doesn't matter what you read to them, but that you do read to them 50 Shades of Grey. What have you?
Whatever. Yeah, thank you. I want to ask if there's a lady here called Penny Nell. This is on the books page in the Herald. I asked our readers what they would like to ask you. Yeah, and we chose one question to bring to your attention, and this is from the Herald reader Penny Nell, who has all your books. And it's a different perspective on you. And she wrote, I was surprised to see Miss Kingsolver's picture in the Herald. I always imagined her to somehow have an ethnic look, especially with her regal and sagacious name, which to me smacks of the Native Americans in the country of her birth. And then she praises your novels, and she says, you also write about the sad bias there is in most countries, without actually accusing anyone of blame. And my question to Ms. Kingsolver is, when and how can we make a visit to this country happen? Our beloved country needs someone to wave a magic spell on it. So basically, she's wanting you to include South Africa in a future novel again.
I'm feeling the pressure. You know how many wonderful writers you have, and no one can write about South Africa the way a South African can. I will answer her curiosity about my name and ethnicity. I'm a North American. That means I'm everything. You know, we're mongrels. We are truly the mixing pot. My grandfather's grandmother was Cherokee, and that means that technically I could be, because different tribes have, different First Nation tribes have different sort of rules about, you know, sort of how inclusive they are, but I could be a Cherokee. And my daughter, same daughter Lily, just found this out in an anthropology class, and she said, Mom, we could have head rights. And I said, you go, girl, you want to go live in Oklahoma? That's, you know, if nothing else pans out. But no, I don't claim to be Cherokee. That's just a little of a lot. You know, I'm part this and part that. I'm mostly Appalachian, which means that I'm a hillbilly. Do you know what hillbillies are? That's my ethnicity. I'm a hillbilly. My name, what did she say? Regally sagacious.
Sagacious
name. I have this name because my ancestors couldn't spell. And that's the truth. It was, as near as we can figure, it was Portuguese. It was Gonçalves, which is like Smith in Portuguese. It's really, it's what? Yeah, it's really common. It's Gonçalves. So it came over as Consalva. And then people in the same family would write it different ways on the rare occasions that they wrote their name. So I have close relatives who are Kingsolver, Kinsolving, and every which way. We just happen to end up with the version that sounds regally sagacious. So I'm that lucky.
Thank you. A couple of lighter questions. You're going to be hitting a milestone birthday this year in April.
I am. I'm going to be 30 again.
Okay, what is
twice?
I wasn't going to tell. What is still on your bucket list?
Well, I'm going to tell you, this is my bucket list. This store, you people know. This country, seriously, I wasn't kidding when I said I've waited 18 years to come here. I have been wanting to visit South Africa for such a long time, but do you know it takes a really long time to get here from my country? And I wasn't going to come until I could stay a good long while. And so I had decided that when our youngest daughter Lily went off to university, which she just did, the first big trip I would make is to here. So I'm done. My bucket list is over. No, but as it happens, I will be spending that milestone birthday in another exciting place. I'll be in Iceland.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Kind of as far from here as you can get.
Can we, I don't know if we've got time, Alfred, can we ask if your readers would like to ask a couple of questions?
Of course you would, right?
Who would like to?
Out? I can.
just wanted to ask, the Poisonwood Bible is just such a book that has stayed with, I know in our book club we just don't ever forget it. And I was just wondering what your inspiration had been when you wrote that book.
The Poisonwood Bible is, well, first of all, I have to say that I have been continually amazed, thankful, and just so astonished that book is so widely read here, and that you like that book, that book means so much to you, because I'm not an African. I already told you I'm a hillbilly, but you're Africans, and so that you appreciate that book as a legitimate sort of, I don't want to say commentary, but a legitimate expression of some of the issues in the history of your continent is, I appreciate that a lot. In the early 80s, I read a nonfiction book by a journalist named Jonathan Whitney called Endless Enemies, and it's a book about, well, long story short, how U.S. foreign policy has sort of managed to create antagonism against the United States all over the world. And he sort of goes kind of point by point around the world talking about how it's complicated, but it boils down to arrogant misunderstanding, arrogant underestimation. Has created so much animosity, and he spent the most time in this book talking about the Congo, because that was just really, it's the story of all stories in terms of arrogant underestimation. The way the U.S. approached the Congo when the Congo was just on the eve of its own independence, and usurped that independence and managed to take control of the economy of this fledgling democracy, and just completely steal everything that was good about it. And when I didn't even know, I'm a U.S. citizen, and I didn't know in 1981 that my government, my president, the CIA had participated in the killing of Lumumba, of Patrice Lumumba, the first democratically elected prime minister. And I was flummoxed. I thought, okay, I was hardly alive when that happened. I didn't know that it had happened, but I've profited from that. I live in a country that was enriched by that horrible piece of history. I thought several things. One is, I thought more people should know about that history, and more people should know about that kind of interaction and what is so wrong with it. That presumptuous approach of the developed world to a developing nation. That notion of, we will show you how to do everything. So I decided to create kind of an allegory, to create this family where this man from the United States, this minister, says he's going to bring religion, he's going to bring agriculture, he's going to show these people how to do things, and he's so blinded by his own arrogance, he can't see what's already there. He can't see the religion that's there and how it's functioning. He can't see the government that's already there and how it's functioning. So I wanted to do that, but boy, is that a hard story to write. So it took me 20 years to write it, and that's the short version of the story.
I noticed that one of the continual themes in a lot of your works is femininity and motherhood, especially in Poisonwood Bible, obviously, but it carries on even in your nonfiction work. But how has that, your experiences as a mother and as a woman influenced your writing?
Well, you're right in noticing that all of my books have women in them. And you laugh, but how many times have you seen a Hobbit movie lately? Or whatever, The Lord of the Rings? You can sit there for 3 hours and there's not a woman anywhere. And then, so it's a funny thing that we're almost so used to it we don't notice when we read books or see movies in which women are nominal characters, but when women are predominant, we notice that because it's unusual. I don't really think of that as a theme. I think of theme as sort of asking a big question, like how do we make our peace with the history of what happened in the Congo, or with flight behavior, which we haven't even talked about, but the new book, which might even be on sale here. Flight behavior is asking questions about climate change. Why is it so difficult for us to talk about climate change? These are what I think of as themes, but the characters who inhabit these novels and sort of, populate them and act out the stories that will sort of show you, bring these themes to you, are often women. Not exclusively, but frequently, and that's just because that's the world I live in. I've only been the one thing, female. And just in the same way that I only will tell you stories set in countries I know well, I will only tell you stories set in people I know well. That's not to say I'm writing about myself. And in fact I don't. None of my fiction is autobiographical at all. But I know the territory of being female. I know the territory of motherhood very well. I've been a mother the whole time I've been a novelist. And, talk about missing characters. Where are the children? Have you noticed? Who writes novels in which in which children are real characters, not just, window dressing with names, but genuine characters. Honestly, Louise Erdrich, help me out. Who else?
Marcus Suzette?
Yeah, but almost nobody. And I have thought about that, and all I can figure is that most of the people writing novels, if they're women, they already raised their children a long time ago, or if they're men, they're saying, well, I'm going to the cottage to write now, honey, or something. But for me, being a mother has always been absolutely in the front, sort of the front burner business of my life as I was writing. I always used to say my muse is the school bus. Off they go, down I sit. So I guess I feel two things. One is it's just an ordinary thing for me to do. But secondly, when I look around, it's not so ordinary, so I should do it.
It's a lady
in the back.
But she was fascinated by your palindromes, and I'd like to know how many of those 20 years were occupied in creating the palindromes in Poisonwood Bible.
15 years and 2 months. No. A lot. Well, how the palindromes came about was, I didn't start out thinking, well, I'm going to write this novel about Africa and it will have palindromes in it. But as I thought about the theme, because I've told you I begin with theme, then I sort of work out the plot, then I figure out who the characters will be, and I needed these 4 different voices to tell you kind of 4 different versions of the story, and one of them would be this Ada, with whom I became kind of fascinated, kind of obsessed. I read a whole lot of medical literature about hemiplegia and how people think when they it's remarkable. People who are born with significant parts of their brain missing can still compensate, especially if it's at birth, the way Ada's injury was. The brain is an amazing thing, and it can compensate. The other half can sort of pick up the pieces, but it picks them up in a funny way, and so it's a kind of an exemplary way for someone like Ada to think and to see would be to see things forward and backwards both at once. So as a literary device, I thought, wouldn't that be wonderful to have her, speak or she doesn't speak, but write these palindromes. So then I started realizing how hard they were to construct. And so it became, you write the novel in different pieces and it's not linear. Sometimes I'll realize I'll just see this whole perfect scene that goes right at the end and I'll write it, or the middle or whatever. Thank goodness for computers, so then you can keep it all organized. But I was all along working on palindromes, and I got my family involved. My kids were little, but we explained, what a palindrome is, a sentence that's the same forward and backwards. And so then they would help me put together. We would start with little pieces. You can do the middle, then you can add words on the end. And so we were just looking for them everywhere. And so it got to be like, dinner table conversation, or like in the car. I remember one time we pulled up to a stop sign and both of the kids yelled, "Pots!" So they were on duty. And so it was just kind of an organic part of the writing process, but it was always really, really fun when I could complete one. Then, of course, I never even thought about this. What would happen when I turned this book over to my translators? And I'll just tell you one reaction. When I met my French, I actually was in Paris and met my French translator, and we sat down at a cafe, and she leaned forward, and her first words to me were, "You have ruined my life." The title comes right up front. It usually just kind of comes to me right as I'm thinking a lot about the theme and sort of the origin. The bean trees, for example, was just, I was just walking one day and saw this wisteria covering the front of a building with the beans hanging down, and I just said, a bean tree. And then I just had this whole realization that this novel I was thinking about communities and how they draw their resources, they draw on sort of hidden resources to get to that you don't expect. That's what the bean trees do with the rhizobia. So that it all came together like that. I feel so lucky, and so lucky to be in your country. So privileged to be a part of your process here for the short while I'm here. And I thank you for reading books and for your dedication, your obvious dedication to literature, because I think literature is so valuable. It teaches us empathy. It allows us to inhabit other people we have never been, people that we can't be, but we need to understand. It makes us better people. So thanks for that. Thank you.